morning, or whatever time it might be. By the time you are joining us, we do acknowledge that we are having some technical difficulties, and despite our best efforts during the week and greatest assurances, sometimes when we come together, things just don't work as we had hoped. And so we continue to press forward and ramp up our efforts in the upcoming week to be able to improve upon that. But we're here now for worship, and whether you feel like making a joyful noise or a wail of exacerbation, whether or not you come assured in this place of God's power at work in the world, or whether you come asking questions and hoping you might get a glimpse of the divine that might give you some comfort and some hope, you are welcome in this place. And our prayer is that during our time here, that we might meet God, that we might all get a glimpse of God together, that we might be strengthened to continue the work of justice, love in the world. Let's worship.
Wonderful experience of growing up here at Pullen. Mom and I started to attend when I was about in 4th grade. Pullen gave me my first taste of choral music in the children's choir, and then later singing Godspell with Michael Hahn and the youth group up here, where we erected a scaffolding in the middle of the choir area. But singing has since become a lifelong love of mine. I often say that singing is my personal form of therapy. I have loved being in the youth group, from having lock-ins and finding the best spot to hide for sardines, which is about right there in the upper corner of the loft. Being in the youth group was also a good counterpoint to my social structure in high school. Uh, Enjoyed going on ski trips, summer mission trips, going to Camp Caswell, and then the pinnacle going to Coventry, England. One summer we traveled to Baltimore City, and there we volunteered with Habitat for Humanity and also split our time at the B. Gaddy Center. At the B. Gaddy Center, we put together and taught a summer camp. It was there that my love of teaching was ignited. In my 20 years of being in education, 16 of those years, I was a primary school teacher. One of my favorite books that I would read to the students and wrote seminars on was The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. For many years, Pullen has been my tree, as it is the tree for many in our community. In the end of the book, the tree was happy to give itself completely to the boy. But if we want Pullen to be able to sustain its giving of itself to our children, youth, and the greater community, we need to give back. I know that some of us give back by volunteering with the various activities and opportunity that Pullen provides. But one way we are being called on to do is to give to Pullen financially. This is so the next generation of Pullenites can enjoy the wonderful programs that Tommy and Brian provide, like those that I benefited from growing up here. We need to pledge to next year's budget so Pullen can also keep on giving to our community and the greater community.
As we offer prayers this morning, we begin with our joys. We give thanks for Abby Thompson, who has been living here at Pullen for the past several months. He recently rented a new apartment very close to the church and will be moving in soon. He has also been made a permanent employee at his job with higher salary and benefits, and so we rejoice with Abby. We also celebrate with Virginia Phillips, one of our oldest members, who turns 101 on this Friday, October 30th. Along with these joys, we name our concerns. We're in prayer for our family in Matanzas, Cuba. On Monday night, the roof of the house next door to the Cairo Center caved in. Thankfully, the debris did not fall directly on anyone, and none of the families living there were injured, but all were greatly traumatized. Among those living in the space are two of the members of the church there, Carlitos and Viola. And so please pray for our friends as we look for ways to support them. They are simultaneously dealing with some economic issues, the rising price of goods in Cuba as well. We stand today and pray for the people of Nigeria as they call for police reform, accountability, and an end to state-sponsored brutality. Ann Petters requests prayer for her granddaughter who was exposed to COVID at her daycare. We also hold in our prayer Gladys Langdon in the death of her husband, Howard. Howard died on Thursday at hospice transitions. And let us continue in prayer. God, I enter this moment with the awareness of your presence, grateful that you invite us to be here. So we take this opportunity to just be here with you. God, to bask in the warmth of your radiance, to be enveloped in your vastness, You who formed the universe with its billions of galaxies, and yet know that we are held close in your hands and we find our grounding there. You are a big God. So help us to embrace a vision beyond the things that our eyes can see. May we not be resigned simply to reforming what is, but creating with you all that is possible for our world. For with you, all things are possible. You are a holy God. May that notion not immobilize us with fear and condemnation, but make us resolute in our aspiration to walk in the way of holiness that we always see in you. And may the reminder that we are stamped with your image assure us of our capacity to do justice and to love kindness, and to do so even the more. God, heal what hurts us. Heal what hurts in us, that we might not be the cause of someone else's woundedness. God, and help us to be healers of the things that are broken in our world. We ask this all in your name. Amen. Turn our attention to the Gospel of Matthew. When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" He said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." Now, while the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them this question: "What do you think of the Messiah? Whose son is he?" They said to him, "The son of David." He said to them, "How is it then that David by the Spirit calls him Lord, saying, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet'? If David thus calls him Lord, how can he be his son?" No one was able to give him an answer, nor from that day did anyone dare to ask him any more questions.
I want to say this morning how grateful I am to my colleagues, especially to my colleague Shalise. It is on Sunday mornings like this when it seems like nothing's just going to go right. She has a way of centering me and grounding us all and keeping us focused on what we're here to do, and that is to be together and to worship God. But I will ask you to pray for me this morning. I'm one of those frustrated and exacerbated individuals when it comes to technology. So, Shalise, you pray for me this morning, okay? You know how sometimes you read a research study and think, well, duh. Well, here's one of those for anyone who is or has been a parent of small children or spent any amount of time with children, Sarah. The research suggests that children ask a lot of questions. But even those of us who knew that are surprised by just how many questions they ask. Some studies show 4-year-olds ask as many as 200 to 300 questions a day. Warren Berger, author of A More Beautiful Question, published in 2014, says kids ask an average of 40,000 questions between the ages of 2 and 5. In his research, Berger also found that over the next couple of years, as kids go to school, the number of questions they ask declines. It seems to me that as Jesus went about his ministry, he channeled his inner child. In my research for this sermon, I discovered that Jesus asked 307 different questions in the Gospels. He has asked 183 questions. The 22nd chapter of Matthew contains some of these questions. Our portion of the text for this morning picks up on a conversation that Shalish read between Jesus and some Pharisees, in which the Pharisees asked Jesus the question, which commandment in the law is the greatest? Once Jesus responds, he then asks his own question. What do you think of the Messiah? Whose son is he? Now, just prior to this conversation, earlier in Matthew 22, some Sadducees had engaged Jesus with some of their questions. Trying to trap Jesus, they started quizzing him about paying taxes, a topic we are hearing much about right now in the run-up to our presidential election. They asked Jesus, is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? Now you have to understand that this question is intended as a trap. With their question about taxes, they're hoping to either get Jesus in trouble with the Roman authorities or with the popular people. The tax they're referring to is a poll tax and was very unpopular with the Jewish people at the time. And so you see, if Jesus answers one way, he'll get in trouble with the Roman authorities, but if he answers another way, he will get in trouble with the people. So in all of his wisdom, Jesus dodges the trap by talking about two different authorities, the civil authorities and God. By calling attention to the different obligations we have, Jesus is reminding us of the differences that exist for us as citizens of the state and citizens of God's kingdom. Jesus carefully suggests that we owe the state exactly what is demanded of us. In this case, the coin with Caesar's head on it. But by contrasting that with his other response, to give to God what is God's, Jesus is exposing both the Pharisees and the Sadducees' religious activities. For you see, they're more concerned with their own power than they are with honoring God. Now, the next set of questions found in Matthew 22 in verses 23 through 33 may be some of the oddest and craziest questions ever asked to Jesus, at least in my opinion. This time, they are focusing their line of questioning on a woman who married 7 brothers in succession after each brother died. And they want to know whose wife of the 7 she will be in the resurrection. I told you it's crazy stuff. But it is from that point on that they ask this question about which commandment in the law is the greatest. That's where we pick up the story. Each of these questions in the 22nd chapter of Matthew deserve attention. Well, maybe not the one, Shalice, about who will be married to whom in the resurrection. But surely the questions raised about our civil and sacred duties when it comes to our money, and which commandment is the greatest, surely those deserve our attention. And at least in my mind, those two are connected. And on this Harvest Sunday, when traditionally the pastor of this church is expected to preach on giving, the 22nd chapter of Matthew offers a very good setup to appeal to our civil and sacred duties when it comes to giving of our money. And let me tell you, there is nothing more I would like to do than preach a sermon that inspires our congregation to fully pledge our 2021 budget by December 31st of this year. There is nothing more that I would like to do and nothing that would make me happier than to do my part in making the work of the Finance Committee easy in the challenging and uncharted waters of 2020. But I'm going to forgo my desire to inspire you with an expected stewardship sermon. And I'm going to forgo my wish to make the Finance Committee's job easy. Because I want to simply tell you what's on my mind today. And what's on my mind today is the power of our questions. Those we ask, those we are asked, and those we might do well to be asking as people of faith. Now, in the category of those we ask, I offer two questions that I hear us asking frequently. First, can the institutional church survive in a nation where some researchers note that 42 to 43% of young millennials and Gen Zs say they don't go to church nor identify with any particular faith, tradition, or religion? And is it really possible to become a multicultural church that has a 135-year tradition of being a predominantly white, middle to upper class congregation? These questions we are asking. I don't have to tell you that the last several years have been tough for churches. Worship attendance has dropped. Religious disaffiliation or non-affiliation is on the rise. Many young adults say they don't believe in God. For those studying religion, the religious landscape across America looks bleak. With these facts trending, how can or will the church survive is a serious question for many. And one might say that only history will tell. But in the meantime, what are churches to do? To begin with, I think we need to reframe the question. In reframing, we need to ask ourselves if survival is the goal, or if the real question might be, can the church remain relevant in these rapidly changing times in which we are living? Now, another way to reframe this question is this way: are we, the people of Pullen, more interested in remaining who we have been or in becoming what our world needs? 2020 has made us all realize the value of what we had before the pandemic. But it has also exposed layer after layer of soft wood under the foundation of our society and our world. Yes, we are a beloved congregation with a deep commitment to justice, love. We are also an aging congregation in a world where 43% of young people say they don't go to church, they don't believe in God, or identify as religious. Why don't those young people see themselves here? Why don't they find home in a place that for many of us feels more like home than the house we grew up in? Is it them? Or is it us? Or is it both? To this reframe, we would do well to look no further than the words of Roger Crook, as written in Pullen's history. In the prologue of his first history book on Pullen, which comes, by the way, at the end of the book, Roger writes this. He writes, Pullen Memorial Baptist Church will not be a people concerned with the survival of the church, but a people committed to the ministry of the church. They will not be a people bound by the past, but a people who draw strength from the past. They will not be a people who despair of the future, but a people whose heritage offers hope. Churches whose vision and ministries remain relevant for the times, represented in the rainbow-hued diversity of God's people, need not worry about survival. Focusing only on survival as an institution is the quickest and shortest way to an early grave. The question is, will the church take a risk to remain relevant and speak prophetically to the issues of our times? This truth was on full display this past week as Pope Francis spoke further on the Catholic Church's response to the LGBT community. Now, you may critique his response as not going far enough, and it doesn't. And I don't know the Pope's full intent in what he said, but it is hard to deny that he is at least attempting to speak to the relevance of the church's response to those who continue to be oppressed and marginalized by the Catholic Church. The reframing of the question from survival to relevance speaks to the second question that I've raised. Is it possible to become a multicultural church that has a 135-year tradition of being a predominantly white, middle to upper class congregation? Despite decades of civil rights work and intentional community building, why don't more people of color feel comfortable here? As one of our Wednesday night speakers, Teddy Reeves, curator of religion at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, said, can they see themselves on the windows? Do they hear themselves in the music? Are their bodies and ideas and passions represented on our councils and committees? Do they believe that we will embrace them or simply expect them to assimilate into our historically white liturgy, language, and lack of expressive response? Are we willing to look at some of our traditions and ways of being church that continue to hold white bias and preference? Are we willing to see through another's eyes and position ourselves in proximity with traditions from other cultures and religious traditions and family traditions? Will we have the prophetic imagination to take this risk for the sake of building God's beloved community here at Pullen? Are we willing to give of our time and our talents and our financial resources to make such a kingdom dream come true here on earth as it is in heaven? Both of these realities beg the question of whether we are grasping on to who we have been or who we think we are versus being willing to open our eyes to see who we actually are and how we are seen by those we seek to include in our community. What would it look like to be a church who isn't running a mission program for a predominantly black community, but who is trying to be church with them? What would it feel like in our worship service if we were making space, as Brian Lee put it a few weeks ago, for people under 30? And more important than knowing the end point of how we might be different is knowing how we might be willing to transform? What are we willing to surrender in service for what is desperately trying to be born in this world? These are the questions we ask. As for the questions we are most often asked, does God really love and accept homosexuals? How can you call yourself Christian and accept and bless LGBTQIA persons? And how can you call yourself a Christian church and believe that Muslims and Jews and non-religious people are all a part of God's beloved community? Now, as I see it, these questions that we are often asked come under the big umbrella question of who is our neighbor? Who does God invite to the table? I know you are thinking, we're past the gay question. We settled that years ago. And yet, if you could listen in on the phone calls and emails I get on a weekly basis, you would understand just how we are so not finished with this question. Weekly, I get calls and emails from individuals who have been and are being spiritually abused by the church, hoping on a prayer that when they call this church and get me, they will hear a voice and a word speaking compassion and blessing and acceptance. We cannot become complacent or silent on the issue, thinking that we have spoken and we don't need to say anymore. Our people are hurting, and they need our witness to continue to be strong and loud and courageous. Our trans family especially need our witness and our voice. And it's the same with our interfaith witness. Sure, we've all been blessed by our willingness to lean into interfaith dialogue and relationship with Muslim and Jewish brothers and sisters, but we cannot rest on our own willingness. Our witness to keep engaging and showing up and speaking up is central to our calling as the people of God. And so here I offer these reframes to this question. What is at stake for the Christian church in a nation that is becoming less Christian and more multi-faith if we are not willing to continue risking what we have and who we are to build bridges and relationships with our siblings of other faith traditions and advocate for their religious freedom in this country? Are we consciously aware that representation is necessary, though not sufficient, for those we say we love to have a voice in how we love them? For some of us, it was such a victory to have gay folks accepted into the church or in this pulpit that we can easily think of this question as solved. But the issues of gender and sexuality are both related to and distinct from the issues of homosexuality. If we close our minds to learning about how God is emerging in these communities, we are no different than the cisgendered heterosexuals of the 90s willing to exclude congregations like Pullen for accepting homosexuals. Are we willing to give of our time and our talents and our financial resources to make such a kingdom dream of a world where all faiths value one another for that dream to come true here on this earth as it is in heaven. The questions we are asked. And last, the question we might do well to be asking as a people of faith. Can we acquire wealth as individuals and as a church and still follow Jesus? Or as a dear friend of mine, a person I have the deepest respect for and whom I consider to have one of the most perceptive theological minds, wrote on her seminary application years ago that she wanted to go to seminary to answer the question, how can you be a Christian and have any money? How we explore this question, our willingness, our spirit in exploring this question will say a lot about our understanding of what is expected of us as citizens of God's realm. As I think about my own response, I try to hold in tension the question, what is enough for me and my house, with Jesus' teaching to share what I have with those who are hungry and thirsty and homeless, and the poor who are oppressed by systems of economic inequality. I try to listen to his words about money being an idol and how wealth distorts our view of building a world where there is justice and equality. And I try to discern as best I can where my resources can join with others to best serve the values I hold as a person of faith. In these times, these are challenging questions. And they are questions we might do well to be asking as God's people. The power of our questions cannot be understated. They tell us something about who we are. The questions we ask, the questions asked of us, and the questions we would do well to be asking. And so I say to you this morning, Pullen, may we be courageous and faithful in asking and living with the questions that will help us discover who God longs for us to become as God's beloved people, with all that we are, with our time, with our talents, and with our money. This week you received, or you should have received in the mail, a packet of information from our church with our budget for 2021, with a pledge card that looks like this, invest in what matters. In a normal year, if there ever was such a thing, as we would be gathered to hear on the last Sunday of October, which is always Harvest Sunday at Pullen, we would have included in our worship of God a ritual for us to, as an act of worship, offer our gifts of time, talent, and money. Obviously, we can't do that this year because we are not all gathered in this space. But we are connected to one another. I want you to pull out your yellow card sometime today and just sit down with it. And as you sit with it, I would simply ask you to think about this. What kind of world do you want to live in? And what kind of church do you want your church to be in that world that makes a difference for justice and love and equality? And then ask, with humility and honesty and truthfulness, what are you willing to surrender to make that dream of God's beloved community come true here on earth as it is in heaven? And what will you surrender to join with this particular faith community to help make that dream come true in our world?
Nancy often says, you are a beautiful people. I think part of what makes us that way is being in a place where we can be who we are fully. And Pullen has offered that to so many of us. I was just thinking of the ways in the sermon in which it has been that space for me. And so let us not be constrained as we dream, as we ask these questions of what is possible to what has been or what is currently or what others say things should be. But let us dream together with God and expect to be able to be guided in that vision from the divine of what is possible. And I believe that if we keep asking the questions, that we can walk together in something that eyes have not seen and ears have not heard, but yet has always been in the mind of God for us. And so let us go forward, asking the questions, seeing the vision, and supporting that vision together. Amen.